Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my post-Pesach end of April 5784/2024 am reading video. Yeah, there's a way to put it. Basically, I am filming in May, a few days after Passover has ended, talking about books that I largely was reading at the end of April and during Passover. So it's a good little wrap up, I guess. Have a lot of books here actually to share, so let's get into it. As is my usual in these AM reading videos, I'm going to start by reviewing a short story from the current literary journal I am reading. And right now I am reading from Pembroke magazine issue number 55. And the story I read for this video is called Sucker by Nico Montoya. And it's a bit of a parable, I think, a bit moralistic, or at least it certainly seems to start that way, or it really hits you over the head. It is an alternate retelling that's supposed to make us look at racism and classism and like bad feelings that we feel for certain groups of people, particularly white people feeling toward poorer black and brown people. But in this case, the poor people are white Victorianists who apparently exist in the modern day. And so the whole story is this man walking through a poor part of town around these Victorianists who are begging for money and panhandling and, you know, blasting Victorian music and things like that. And he's thinking about, you know, wanting to be liberal-minded and wanting to support programs to help these people. But, you know, there's still a lot of stereotyping about, like, based on race, like, you know, these white people, and look at how their skin gets ruddy, and look at how dirty they are for living this Victorian lifestyle, apparently, in the modern day. And I guess the Victorian lifestyle is supposed to, you know, be coupled with poverty. I mean, and it's like a Victorian urchin Cockney style lifestyle that it's just very heavy-handed to say, like, look at what, you know, white people in the real world are actually doing to black and brown people who in this story seem to be mostly bearing like Arab or Middle Eastern names, that sort of thing. And at the end of it, some of this mistrust of the protagonist is justified, as he is swindled and stolen from and given goods that he was told was something else. Like, you know, one woman, you know, gives him a carved chess piece for giving her money that she says is homemade, even though it was made in China. And then somebody else swindles his AirPods. So it's almost like, you know, the stereotypes, the negative stereotypes are justified within this story. I don't know if that's meant to mean something deeper about these fears of the other, but I generally feel like it would have been better served in a more nuanced way, probably remaining within real life examples rather than, you know, this weird turnaround where Victorian people, urchins, apparently live in today's society. Which I could never quite take seriously, just I guess because whenever I hear Dickensian, I think of people like cosplaying today. I don't know, it did not really work for me, and in fact I have a book later that, you know, again stays with real life examples of sociopolitics, and I feel like works a fair bit better for me in sort of sussing out, you know, prejudices and complicated realities, although to be fair, that one's a novel and it has a little more space, so I guess there's that. But before I get to talking about that novel, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the books that I mentioned in my last AM reading video, starting with Bookish People by Susan Coll. It was a book I got at the Gaithersburg Book Festival last year, which will be happening again in just a couple weeks now. I'm very excited. But I really did enjoy this book. It takes place at a fictionalized Northern Virginia indie bookstore, following the owner, who is this recently widowed 54-year-old woman who's kind of been jolted out of her easy existence by the sudden death of her husband and then the Charlottesville marches, and she's sort of fearfully disconnecting from the world in some ways. And then also we're following her events manager, who, in a melodramatic twist, has found out that a very famous poet who is in bad standing for bad behavior might in fact be her biological father. And so she books him for a reading in the store, even as every other literary organization is shunning him because there's, cancel culture backlash. So anyway, I mean, I really enjoyed the story overall. I could nitpick that, well, I mean, this is, upmarket, so even, so everything isn't too overly melodramatic, but on the other side of the coin is the idea that I think Coll's humor gets a little overwrought after a while. Like, there's just so many, like, overwhelming things that are bearing down on her characters, and even though it's all kind of hilariously talked about in the narrative, you get fatigued by it after a while. But at the same time, it was an easy read, and it's about book culture. It's about DC area culture, which I live in the DC area. The main character is Jewish, and I'm Jewish, and so in a lot of those, I guess, appealing to things I, have some affiliation with, I really enjoyed them. And I do feel like most bookish people who are in the mood for sort of a romp that only skitters around some of the bigger, tougher issues, but for the most part, you don't have to get too bogged down in the depression of it all, and you can just sort of chortle away with a vacuum cleaner that is always falling apart and that sort of thing. This could be a fun book, and there's an equilibrium keel at the end where, even though it's for a while, of course, everything seems to be falling apart within the bookstore and within the personal lives of these characters, it comes together in the end, as you do. And so I did enjoy it, warts and all. And the second book that I started last week, finished this week, is Day by Michael Cunningham, which was a little more of a disappointment to me. It kind of made me sad, I guess because I was so hyped when I heard it was coming out last year. And it didn't really come together for me. And I think, with Michael Cunningham, some of his novels do, some of his novels don't. I think that's what it is for me. But I was getting vibes of two of my favorite of his novels, By Nightfall and The Hours, and it didn't really live up, I don't think. This is a book that takes place during a day, but the day starts on April 5th, 2019, and then the middle of the day is April 5th, 2020, and the end of the day is April 5th, 2021. And we're following a family and various members around, basically in the before, during, and after of the COVID pandemic, which is never explicitly named, but you can tell how things are very different in the second two parts. But in the first part, there's a lot of, drama in a way that's about to unfold. I mean, this is very literary fiction, so it doesn't really get into melodrama or a huge sense of plot. But on the backside, I just feel like there wasn't enough development of anything happening that I could fully fall for the characters. There wasn't enough time, which is, I guess, ironic to say for, a span of 3 years, but you're taking this really insular focus into, a morning, an afternoon, and a night of their life, which is, I mean, even in The Hours, all of the characters get a full day. I don't know. And I feel like there was more of a narrative in that, whereas in a way everybody here was just sort of trundling through crises, and it didn't seem to have a full focus at the end to necessarily pull it all together. I feel like by and large the character I identified with most was Robbie, who was a 38-year-old gay man recently out of a relationship, who had been living with his sister and her family for a while, teaching middle school, a job he very obviously is not all that enthralled with, and he is looking into moving and possibly, upending his life and starting something new. And something I didn't even mention in my book review is that his relationships to his niece and nephew are so defined, and so that really, I guess, spoke to me too, because I'm also really in love with my niece and nephew, and this made me feel shame that I wasn't as involved in their lives as I should be. Maybe it would be easier if I moved into my sister's house. But yeah, I feel like he was a character who was, I don't know, the easiest to latch onto, and he was living this alter ego life through a character he created through stolen pictures on Instagram. But anyway, the other characters, you know, in large part didn't work as well for me. I mean, maybe if they were a little more fleshed out, it would have. I mean, I feel like Robbie's brothers-in-law's midlife crisis, it's relatively easy to understand and to get along with. I think Isabel was far less, the sister was far less fleshed out. Nitpicking about the kids, particularly the 5-year-old. It's so hard to write 5-year-olds. The adolescent kid was a little, you know, more believable. And then there's the brother-in-law Dan's brother Garth and his baby mama Chess, where I think Garth was supposed to be a sort of slightly more vaulted donor dad, where he would have a tiny bit of involvement in the kid's life, but not too much, and that's something that changes throughout the book about, you know, the push and pull between the parents and where his place is, which could have been interesting, but I just don't think there was enough time given to these issues, and mostly I was just frustrated. I'm like, Chess, if you don't want him this involved in your kid's life, then why are you always involved in his family's life? It's just, I don't know. Anyway, it didn't come together for me, and, you know, the ending with it felt more like symbolic than believable about what happened post-COVID and how things changed because of COVID. I think I've had some other novels of his, I think, that I've read that are a little more and this one's a little more for me. But I have a few more on my TBR of Cunningham, so I'll hope for the best with those. So I guess I'm keeping on with this author. I started and finished a couple of books this past week or so, including Revival Season by Monica West, which I chose for my TBR game, the page 112 tag, which I will link down below. But this one also, I think, was relatively disappointing to me. I know when I read the page 112 tag, I was like interested in the crisis of faith that Miriam, the main character who's 15, is going through. But in general, I feel like the narrative is too simplistic. The characters are too one-dimensional for the most part, with only like a couple of nods to, you know, nuanced backstories and that sort of thing. But in general, this story follows a year in the life of Miriam and her family, the Hortons, as they are going on a circuit for a revival season. Miriam's father, Samuel, is a pastor who can heal people and is invited to various revivals in the South, but his reputation is dwindling because it seems like instead of healing people, he's getting in fights, physical altercations with people who don't believe in him. And so slowly his reputation is failing, although it seems like it takes a significant amount of time for his home church in Texas to, I don't know, cotton on to that fact. But anyway, so for Miriam, this is about seeing her father for who he is, and he really is not just a con man, but also, you know, abusive and narcissistic. And so as she is like being disillusioned by her father, it seems like she is finding the ability herself to heal as he is losing his. And it's hard to say West's opinion exactly of what healing is, because it's an insular novel of people who believe healing can be possible, but it's also kind of wishy-washy on that. Frankly, I feel like, you know, part of the reason Miriam criticizes her father is her saying that you say that it's you doing the healing and not God, but honestly, she's kind of in the same boat, like where she wants to be personally recognized rather than being, you know, some sort of complete abnegated altruist who's just taking the power from a higher source. Most of Miriam's healing attempts work, all of Samuel's, at least within the story, don't. And then there's a point at the end where Miriam tries to heal someone who she can't, and there's this tacked on resolution. It feels like, well, some people don't need to be healed. They're whole as they are. And I'm like, well, where's, you know, the moral justification for who's whole and who needs to be healed? And maybe it's supposed to be, well, you can't know everything and God knows things. And just a lot of the characterization and the narration was just so, you know, flat to me. I mean, it was dramatic and kind of fun to read, but I don't feel like there was a lot of nuance or challenge in any of this. You could easily tell who the good guys were, who the bad guys were, and this didn't really work for me very much. Next, I read and finished a poetry collection, When There Was Light by Carlie Hoffman, for National Poetry Month. And I made a whole video about it, which I'll link down below, where I, you know, delve into some of the poetry. So I'll just be quick about it here, I think. I'm not a huge poetry expert, so I get a little anxious sometimes. But I do feel like there was a lot of visceral imagery in here about the juxtaposition of, like, you know, physicality. Like, you know, there's poems that take place on a family farm, or a lot of, or there's some comparisons of like death to snow and that sort of thing. And then there was a Jewish commentary that I personally picked up on and analyzed a fair bit. So I enjoyed the collection. I thought it was compelling, and yeah, I'll leave more information down below. I'm also in the middle of two novels I can talk about, starting with Paris Metro by Wendell Steavenson, which I put on my Goodreads TBR long enough ago that it's gotten to the top of the list, and it's part of my resolution to clear the top of my Goodreads list. And so this is the novel I was referencing at the very beginning of the video, about talking about issues of cultural and race and religious clashes, because this novel, first of all, it's written by a reporter who has reported on the Middle East, and she has created a reporter as a main character who's this sort of polyglot Westerner with, you know, UK and American parentage, who is mostly based out of Paris, who goes into the Middle East. Well, we had this sort of prologue in the beginning that starts at Charlie Hebdo, which I wish it kind of hadn't, but in 2003, she's reporting in Iraq after the American invasion, and at that time she finds a man called Ahmed who works for the UN and who's Western educated and who grew up a bit himself in DC, and then his father was assassinated by Saddam, like, you know, formerly part of Saddam's government, and then, you know, seen as a traitor ultimately. So a lot of his feeling, especially in the beginning, is very anti-Saddam, and he's pretty critical even of fellow Iraqis, and seems to want to help the West, but also is a little negative toward the West too, and has some, you know, sense of cultural Arabic pride, and he's sort of a slippery character, and Kit, our main character, gets involved with him, but shortly after she learns he is not quite who he says he was, like the wife he said was dead is not, so he is technically a bigamist when he married her, and he just sort of dumps it on her that, by the way, now she's died in a terror attack, and I'm going to snatch my son away from her family, and we're going to raise him, or really you're going to raise him, because Ahmed keeps traveling on his own. He doesn't seem to want to be tied down to anyone, but he wants sort of more access, I suppose, to his own son, to, you know, and as a control mechanism, but it's a lot more nuanced than, like, you know, the controllingness of the last book I talked about. And meanwhile, Kit is very much responding to unfolding realities around her as she is talking about war reporting and sort of getting hardened to the realities of Arabs and other Middle Easterners, and the narrative about, you know, who is more right, the Western sort of perception, or the Middle Eastern perception of the world, and of free speech, and of honor and religion. And so, you know, it trundles around a little bit, especially in the beginning. It's just like, it feels like it's more about politics than, you know, developing characters. The main character is named Kit Kitteridge, which makes her feel like she stepped out of a 1930s crime novel. It's a little too kitschy. Ultimately, the story becomes more interesting, especially through the relationship between Kit, who can't have children herself, and little Ahmed, the son, who she raises, and he sort of exists between worlds, growing up in Paris but being Iraqi. And it gets into responses about, like, the Charlie Hebdo massacre, and where in fact they lose a friend in that massacre, But, you know, it's something I could kind of buy, the way that the writing goes, and the character is threaded in beforehand. And so there's a lot of interesting threaded commentary on what's going on and what she believes about it, and trying to, like, what that line is, I guess, between, like, you know, you go into journalism and wanting to cover these people, usually as a Westerner, for the liberal values of it, like, you know, to have everyone's voice be heard, but there's such different, you know, cultural biases for groups of people about what's acceptable and what's not, and there's that added layer of people trying to escape, you know, crumbling, you know, situations in the Middle East, but, you know, a lot of them, when they come to, like, Europe and America, for example, or, you know, mostly Europe in this case, a lot of people want to, you know, live their lives quietly. Other people, you know, there's still that chasm between, you know, the worldview they were brought up in versus, you know, what they're faced with in Western liberal societies, that sort of thing. And so I'm finding it very fascinating and very prescient to think about. So this is this book's sort of vantage point, talking about that, but then Kit is in an interesting position because of her relationships with the Ahmeds and trying to sort of understand her point of view as a Western woman versus their point of view as someone who, two people who are, you know, have foots more in two different worlds, as it were. And so I am enjoying it. I mean, there's some things I can quibble about with the writing style and the framing in the beginning especially, but I you know, it's compelling to read about, especially given ongoing realities. The next book I am currently reading, I'm listening to on Audible. It is The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store by James McBride. This book is technically in the running for the BookTube prize right now, but I think I can talk about it because it's not on my ballot. I'm not giving any thoughts prematurely about anything I will officially be voting for. I think that's how Robert's rules unfurl for this. I am, in fact, reading this for one of my synagogue's book clubs, a library book club that's meeting on Sunday, so I got to go ahead and finish it relatively quickly. But it's been on my radar for a while. It's won a lot of non-Jewish and Jewish awards, and the premise of the story largely takes part in a Pennsylvania suburb. Mostly the action is taking place in the 30s, although there was a little bit of a prologue in the 70s, which sets up the idea of a crime that was covered up. And we meet the last Jew of town called Malachi, who in the 30s is this sort of itinerant Hasidic character, I guess, almost, ultra-Orthodox character who comes into the story to attend a dance hall event at one of the other main character, Moshe's dance halls. Moshe has become famous. He's a Romanian Jewish immigrant to the US, and he has become famous through building up two dance halls, one for Yiddish music and one he decides to go for, you know, Negro, as it would have been called then, music and jazz music. Because he lives on the Hill, which is an area that's impoverished, and in fact the Jewish community is starting to move away down the hill, down more toward where the white people live. But he kind of has to stay on the hill because his wife, Shona, is the proprietor of this grocery store, the Heaven and Earth Grocery Store, and she refuses to move. She says, you know, this is my neighborhood, these are my people, and she's very much a character who maybe more than any of the other characters is sort of the most moralistic, not without being, you know, pious about it, I think. But she is supposed to embody the tikkun olam ideal, the saving a broken world sort of ideal, which frankly I think is a little oversimplified and overdone in discourse about Jewish religion and thought. But in a way, I'm just going to have to put that aside. This is also a somewhat Victorian novel in that we sort of jump around to different characters within the community, mostly Jewish and African American. Also a couple from other groups. We have some Italians who've cropped in. And we also have the perspective of the main antagonist. And I think McBride does try to, you know, make us understand where he's coming from. It's not it's not about endorsing where he's coming from and sort of the racism that undercuts what he's doing, especially marching in Klan marches, but sort of this grievance culture of the original Mayflower descendants, most of whom are not in fact original Mayflower descendants, but it's part of the WASP heritage, as it were. And so he becomes an antagonist at one point, but the main thrust of the story is that there is this young black boy named Dodo, and he lost his hearing in this tragic accident and has not gone to school since because he can't hear the teachers. So the government wants to put him in a special school or an institutionalized school, which basically means that he'll be thrown away, and it's not an education, it's just about being locked up basically. And so his community doesn't want that for him, and his uncle Nate works for Moshe and reaches out to them about hiding Dodo in the basement of the grocery store. And of course Shona says, no, he's going to live with us. And when the government people come out, we're going to send him to my neighbor Bernice's yard to play with her Negro kids, so he'll be hidden. And so that is what they're trying to do. It's about a community trying to come together to save this young boy, and I feel like that's been a major part of the discourse around this book, and the reviews are about really leaning into this positivity and about a community coming together and, ignoring any lines in the sand between them to come together to try to save a boy from, the government, which is a little more distant and shadowy and that sort of thing. Although then McBride is starting to get more into sort of big sweeping statements near the end of the book where I am now. And I have mixed feelings about these big sweeping statements, which certainly take us out of not only 1930 or 1970 and go straight into, the 2020s. But McBride has this huge statement about all, culture and, the realities of the early 20th century immigrants and the black people who've moved up from the South to the North, their cultures being streamlined and made sanitized for like commercialism and public consumption. And part of me thinks, what is any of this doing in a story that's supposed to be about a bunch of 1930s community members saving a boy from an institution? I don't know. I'll be interested to discuss all of that more with my book club in a couple days, and then I guess I'll write my review and get to the bottom of it. I mean, I do feel ultimately like I'm really enjoying this story like I thought I would, but it's not quite what I thought it would be either. Well, I'll get to the bottom of it. And the final book I will mention just briefly before signing off is Enter Ghost by Isabella Hamad, which I am in fact reading for the BookTube Prize for Fiction Ballot Group C. This is a book returning to other themes I've talked about. This is actually Palestinian literature about a Shakespeare production taking place in the West Bank, I believe, among other things. And it was recently shortlisted for the Women's Prize, so that's something exciting for this book. More importantly, it is in the quarterfinals for the BookTube Prize, and the BookTube Prize was started by Robert Sheard back in 2019. The point of the prize is to assess, judge the best of U.S. published literary fiction and nonfiction published the year before. We start with 2 long lists of 48 books in the octafinals, and then through 4 rounds we whittle those lists down into winners and runners-up in fiction and nonfiction. So I did create a preliminary thoughts video about my ballot of this book and 5 others, which I'll link down below, and I'll also link to more BookTube Prize information down below. And that about covers it for me. I feel like I've rambled on a lot longer than I hoped to with this video, and I'd like to, get my weekend going and all of that, I guess I had a lot to say. There's a lot of books here, but that trend might have to cool it a bit in May, because I was really privileging my non-BookTube Prize books in these videos so that I'd always have something to talk about, and I wanted to start all the books in April or yada yada, but now I'm at the point where I actually have a significant amount of my ballot left to read, and I have to submit it by May 30th, so I really need to read those books, even though I can't talk about them in much detail on this channel. So Probably the videos will get shorter, I assume, because I'll have to spend more of my reading time reading the BookTube prize books, and that's the way it'll have to be. At least it'll be easier, I suppose, to sit down and, edit and post these videos. They won't take as long. I'm sure it'll all get done. I have, of course, a big, list of May books that I want to get to this month, and in that vein, my next video should be my Maybe Made Rosh TBR video for a readathon I want to take part in May. It's a very small readathon, at least. And yeah, I hope you are all doing well, especially my fellow BookTube prize judges, with where you are in judging your ballots, and everyone else is enjoying what they are reading this month. And thank you so much for watching, everyone. I'll see you next time.